This here is an event that has no effect. It is written in the game code as institution_events.53. Its localization is set to trading concessions, which makes it unhelpful to track down, but this event in particular is the consequence of a small but historically cool event chain. To see this event, you need to be a European that has embraced global trade, possess an on-the-map trade company in the India region, and finally, the decision found Indian trade company should have been clicked. If you do all of those things, a nation in India that has the Indian tech group which has not embraced global trade can be the target of institution_event.52, assuming it has positive opinion of the European nation mentioned earlier and has also met them. If these conditions are met, the Indian nation gets the event institution_event.52, with the European nation that you should be playing as set as the target. One of the options for the Indian nation that has popped the earlier event lets them set up a European trade factory, the factory in question giving them global trade, the institution on the province, as well as some production bonuses while diminishing their trade power from a province by a very significant margin. This means that the existent European trade company grows its economic strength relatively to the Indian nation in that node because the factory province, which is still owned by the Indian nation, gets a pretty major trade power reduction, and as such the trade company gets technically a bigger slice of the pie. Finally, that event that the Indian nation gets, if they choose to set up the European trade factory again, gives the European quote-unquote overlord of the trade company province the event institution_events.53, the event we started this video with, which informs the overlord that this trade factory province exists, and if the Indian tag ever decides to shut down the trade factory, you will get a trade conflict casus belli on the Indian tag. Keeping up with me so far? See, from a thematic historical experience, this event chain, despite being 2 events long, is really cool. It highlights European trade and colonial policy while also providing the perspective from the end of the Indian nation, namely why they would sometimes willingly invite colonizers into their country. It's to obtain economic and technological concessions in return. Flavor-wise, this event is amazing. In the game though, institution_event.53 specifically, namely the European nation being informed that the trade post exists, has to be functionally, if not the most, then certainly top 10 most useless things in the game. To state that this event has practically zero actual game impact would be to give it an undeserving compliment. Trade conflicts were brutal in history, but they are terrible casus belli in the game, and even then, the event does not provide a trade conflict CB. The event in practice politely informs me that I could potentially gain a trade conflict CB in the future. That's all it does. Now, normally, I would just click the event and move on with my life. In fact, I'm prepared to say I've probably done so previously. It was such an uneventful occurrence that I genuinely forgot the previous times I did. But this event popped up to me when I was doing my weekly stream of the GB monument stealing campaign, and naturally, just so that I could feel an emotion, I captured 1 Persia and 1 Northern Italy, which unfortunately, since it was around the 1550s, was done before absolutism, which meant that I was put into a respectable 550% overextension. That would have been fine. In fact, I was fine overall, I did recover from this position, but during this 550% overextension escapade, I also happened to be running a small shortage of around 1,000 admin points needed to even start coring all the land that I just painted British. This again wouldn't have been that big of an issue. Ironically enough, lack of admin points is a problem that is solved by just sitting around and letting admin points generate from thin air. But I also happened to be running a shortage of around 100,000 men for my armies. Europe and the Middle East were in a coalition against me for some weird reason, and I happened to have around 350,000 ducats of debt because of the aforementioned monuments I was stealing. Now, 350,000 ducats is around the price of a modern-day mortgage, which is something I noticed, as the debt was costing me 1,300 ducats a month in interest alone. Thankfully, again, I am GB, so I can just afford that kind of debt. But to put it mildly, everyone in my country, every man, woman, and child was revolting, and even my core lands with accepted cultures and same religion were also revolting. So I had to go persuade the 1.7 million French particularists that rose up around Paris that actually they should take their qualms to the big man upstairs, and as such I provided them with an expedited train ticket. This diplomatic maneuver, though, continued to cost me manpower and money, resources I certainly didn't have spare at the moment. And as the 550% overextension was hitting me with chronic negative events, I was getting constant stab hit, constant separatist sentiments, and constant magistrates resigning, as well as, other bad things like that. And in that whirlwind of what I can best describe as peak EU4, I got institution_event.53, the trade concession event, if you will. And the sheer lack of consequences of that event, in that pure EU4 emotion I was partaking in at the moment, certainly made me lose stability in real life. I couldn't even enjoy the slightly increased trade power in India I now technically possessed, because 550% overextension reduces my trade power abroad by a small-ish percentage known as 5,500%, meaning that my trade company went from 0 trade power before to 0 trade power now. And I wasn't invading India anyway, not yet. I was busy with Europe for now, and India was going to be done when I was done with Europe. So from a purely gameplay point of view, the event was useless. However, from a flavor point of view again, the event is amazing. It's not specific to any nation. Its wide scope means it provides flavor on a variety of nations. It introduces historical colonial developments, and it does so in a way from the Indian nation's point of view too. Well, it can make sense to self-colonize yourself and allow a trade company factory to be set up in return for the bonuses. I cannot even critique the game itself for not making the bonuses more over the top, as it were. Let's be honest here, historically one trade company in a trade company zone, even as profitable as India, was probably not exactly noticeable on the balance sheet for the entire nation. And from the Indian country's point of view, the one trade company province didn't exactly cripple their nation outright either. It's ironically enough a very reasonable event in its scope, and sets up potential for future escalation, sure, but at the moment is just one trading outpost. It's practically a perfect event from a flavor point of view, and frankly even from a historical learning point of view. Whoever Paradox made this event can certainly pat themselves on the back. But this event, objectively, does nothing. And frankly, we're forced to ask the question, all that flavor text written, all that effort put into making an interesting blurb with historically relevant and immersive event text, just for it, I would argue at least 99% of cases get clicked away without a second thought. No, really, Paradox players famously don't read events, and life has to be communicated to them through the red "this is bad" and green "this is good" lens. Speaking of, please proceed to pretend the like button is green and click that to make yourself happy if you haven't already clicked it. And if that dosage of mental green isn't enough for you, please look at the subscribe button. See if you haven't clicked it yet, make sure to click it for that extra double green effect. Self-shilling aside, my point is, flavor text has genuinely no impact on gameplay because by construction, if it did have an impact on gameplay, it wouldn't be flavor text, it would be just game text and game information. The question then becomes, if no one's reading it, should Paradox stop making it? Well, now I think it's important to take a step back. I have had to, multiple times in my life, explain what EU4 is when prompted, usually by normal people. And my go-to pitch for the game, or at least explanation, is that you are placed in charge of a country from the 15th century to the 19th century, and you get to do things to roleplay as a monarch or a president that decide things are good or bad for your nation, and take charge, see how you would perform as a historical ruler. That is the pitch for EU4 itself from the developers too. To quote their Steam entry, it is a chance to control any nation in the world and lead it through 4 dramatic centuries, starting from the late Middle Ages and culminating in the Napoleonic era. Rule your land and dominate the world with unparalleled freedom, depth, and historical accuracy. Because that is what the idea of EU4 is. Now, the gameplay, if you're doing a non-modified stat world conquest like a Great Britain blob, is very different, and that's an understatement, since a World Conquest EU4 run is basically a rebel simulator with mana management characteristics. Now, I enjoy this type of gameplay, and indeed, in that environment, flavor text is pointless. See, if you're doing something like Ryukyu 1 tags in 1445, the game becomes a sandbox puzzle game that is desperately trying, but still failing, to stop you from committing downright unhinged things on humanity. But that isn't against the selling point. EU4 doesn't advertise, do you want to kill separatists on repeat for 400 years of the game, because you get to kill separatists on repeat for 400 years of the game as its selling point. Indeed, when you reduce EU4 to a modifier spreadsheet that needs to be solved, and you reduce a one culture run on how do I generate the dip points necessary in time to culture convert everything, most certainly flavor text absolutely doesn't matter. But that's not where we started playing EU4. I don't think anyone really did it because they loved fighting island separatists thousands of times over. The over-the-top level of understanding of EU4, for me anyway, comes from a place of love for the roleplay flavor of the game. A love for the aesthetics, a love for the time period, a love for the mechanics, and yes, a love of the flavor text. Little half-jokes from statements like, "We will defend this land to the last drop of peasant blood," and even Easter egg localizations on the mercenary court policy. What if we employed the same mercenaries, but we chose to pay them less? A truly innovative idea. Even within my over-the-top tryhard runs, I tend to take a mental break to justify to myself how I'm unironically enough still roleplaying, albeit I'm roleplaying as a winner. Which tends to mean an absolutist dictator hellbent on world domination, ruling with an iron fist, but I believe my point still stands. Flavor text doesn't matter when you already love the game. But chances are, you're not going to love the game if it doesn't have flavor text. With that said, that is all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, W Haste, Slemon, Star72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Nanhatan, Nikas, The Awesome Rabbit, Best for Gaming, Grabbo Flavia, Kono, Andrea Zalberg, Deki, Stov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napo, Glorious Leader, Zerkis, Mr. Goomshock, Yukata, Danray, Arthur Tan, Jack, and Marvi.